I speak to you as one speaks when the door has already closed, not slammed, not barricaded, but closed with the quiet certainty that comes when a hand no longer reaches for the handle. Again and again in my patience, I saw this moment arrive without announcement. It does not feel triumphant, it feels final. The one who depended on your responsiveness senses it first, not as loss, but as vertigo. Something they leaned on has been removed, and the floor they assumed would receive them does not answer. For a long time, your presence was readable, it could be entered, even when you were wounded. There was access, even when you were exhausted. There was a channel. This is what the other learned to rely upon. I have called this reliance a moral economy, a tacit agreement in which one soul supplies affect, repair, and recognition, while the other draws upon it as if it were inexhaustible. In my work on the dynamics of the psyche, I observed how such economies persist not through cruelty alone, but through habit sanctified by guilt. Now that habit has broken, the break is clean. You did not declare it. You did not dramatize it. The shift completed itself when the last internal argument fell silent. There is a particular stillness when that happens. It is not numbness. It is not indifference. It is the absence of bargaining. The energy that once moved outward, scanning for cues, interpreting moods, preemptively softening the air, has withdrawn into structure. Where there was once permeability, there is form. Those who once entered you with ease now test the doors. They try urgency, they try charm, they try injury. Each attempt assumes the old passage still exists. They do not understand that access is not blocked. It has dissolved. In my patience, I saw this misunderstanding provoke panic. The other mistakes silence for strategy and waits for the reveal. But there is no reveal. There is only the fact that the psychic key no longer fits. The key itself has not broken. The lock has changed. I once wrote, in essence, that when consciousness expands, it does not negotiate with the old gods. It replaces them. The God here was not love, but responsiveness. It promised endless availability, endless explanation, endless forgiveness. You lived under that promise until the cost became visible, not felt, visible. That is an important distinction. Pain can be endured for decades. Visibility ends it. When you saw the pattern as a pattern, not as fate or failure, the promise lost its hold. What terrifies the one who depended on you is not retaliation. It is the absence of leverage. Guilt no longer opens the gate. Obligation no longer applies pressure. Your face no longer mirrors their state back to them. In my work on shadow, I learned that the most destabilizing encounter is not with overt aggression, but with the withdrawal of projection. When you ceased to carry what was never yours, the other is forced into direct contact with themselves. Few are prepared for that. You may notice that anger is present, but it no longer spills. It has been integrated. Integrated anger does not shout. It holds shape. This is why your calm is misread as coldness. It is not cold. It is ash after a fire that has already done its work. The fire burned without heat long before it went out, consuming illusions rather than bonds. What remains is not tenderness withdrawn, but clarity embodied. In one dream that recurred among those who reached this point, I saw an archive sealed behind iron doors. Inside, shelves held names written in careful script. The dreamer watched as the ink faded, not violently, but steadily, until the pages were blank. No grief accompanied the erasure, only relief. This dream does not announce itself as healing. It announces completion. The psyche has stopped recording claims. The one who fears you now will attempt interpretation. They will tell themselves a story in which you are punishing them, manipulating them, withholding to gain advantage. This interpretation protects them from the truth. The truth is simpler and more frightening. There is nothing to gain. You have nothing left to lose. When loss is complete, fear changes sides. The power reversal does not come from dominance, but from the end of need. In my observations, such a shift often follows prolonged moral labor. You were asked to be patient, understanding, forgiving, endlessly flexible. Each request sounded reasonable in isolation. Together, they formed a system that fed on your visibility. The moment you withdrew that visibility, the system collapsed. Systems always collapse when their unseen resource is removed. The one who benefited will call this cruelty. It is not cruelty, it is physics. There is a second dream that belongs here. A fire burns in a hearth, but the room does not warm. The dreamer places a hand near the flames and feels nothing. The fire consumes paper, then wood, then itself, leaving ash arranged like a diagram. This dream marks the end of reactive heat. The psyche has converted energy into form. What was once volatile now supports weight. You may wonder why this frightens those who once held you close. It is because they cannot enter you to regulate themselves. In my work on the relations between the ego and the unconscious, I saw how some personalities rely upon others as extensions of their own regulation. When that extension withdraws, anxiety surges. They attempt to restore the old arrangement. They knock louder. They wait longer. They accuse. None of it works. The ledger remains open because it no longer needs to be kept. Accounts are settled by cessation, not by reconciliation. This is the point at which many imagine something is missing in you. They are wrong. What is missing is the old role. Roles collapse when the psyche integrates what it had outsourced. You have taken back your anger, your discernment, your right to opacity. Boundaries, at this stage, are not defenses. They are architecture. I speak of this with restraint because it is often romanticized. There is nothing romantic here. There is gravity. The calm that follows is dangerous not because it harms, but because it cannot be appealed to. I have seen how those who encounter this calm feel as if they are standing before a sealed landscape. No path announces itself. No sign invites entry. The fear arises from the realization that persuasion has ended. Do not mistake this for isolation. It is not retreat, it is consolidation. The psyche has chosen coherence over connection at any cost. In such a state, explanation feels unnecessary. Even vulgar, words would only reopen what has already closed. The other senses this and calls it abandonment. They cannot name the deeper terror that the mirror has been removed, and they must now face themselves without mediation. What has completed inside you cannot be undone by apology or threat. It does not respond to sentiment. It does not respond to memory. It responds only to reality, and reality has already been acknowledged. This is why the fear you evoke is disproportionate. They are not afraid of you. They are afraid of a world in which you are no longer available as refuge, judge, or witness. I do not soften this for you. I name it. When empathy withdraws its promise of repair, power reverses, access ends, and what stands before them is not your absence, but your structure. The fear intensifies when they realize that nothing they do alters the weather inside you. In earlier days, a raised voice, a softened tone, a crisis introduced at the right hour would have produced movement. Something would have shifted in your eyes, in your posture, in the rhythm of your replies. That movement was the sign of access. Now there is none. The absence of reaction is not staged, it is structural. And structure, once formed, does not negotiate with impulse. In my work on the structure and dynamics of the psyche, I observed how psychic energy seeks the path of least resistance. For years, you were that path. Your empathy absorbed what others could not metabolize. You carried contradictions, excuse, unfinished emotions, and returned them softened, translated, bearable. This made you indispensable and invisible at the same time. Indispensable as function, and visible as person. When that function ends, the one who relied on it experiences not loss alone, but disorientation. The map they used no longer corresponds to the terrain. They may accuse you of becoming someone else. This accusation is revealing. It confesses that they never saw you as you were, only as you were usable. Again and again in my patience, I encountered this moment when the withdrawal of a psychic function is misinterpreted as betrayal. But betrayal implies a pact consciously broken. What has happened here is different. The pact was unconscious, and it dissolved when consciousness arrived. The ledger returns here, not as an object you hold, but as an image that explains what has ceased. You no longer tally emotional credits. You no longer track who has been patient, who has waited, who deserves another chance. Moral arithmetic has ended. This is why arguments aimed at fairness no longer reach you. Fairness belongs to a system of exchange. You have stepped out of exchange, not above it, out of it. This is often mistaken for hardness. It is not hardness, it is density. The psyche has condensed. Where you were once diffuse, spread thin across many needs, you are now gathered. This gathering feels to others like exclusion. To you, it feels like gravity. Energy no longer leaks. It holds. In my observations of shadow integration, I learned that anger is the last effect to be allowed back into consciousness. Before integration, anger either explodes or implodes. After integration, it becomes boundary. This is why your anger no longer announces itself. It has become implicit. The boundary does not say no. It simply is. Those who fear you most are those who sense that they can no longer provoke explanation. Explanation was the last opening. As long as you explained, you remained in dialogue. Dialogue kept the bond alive even when it was corrosive. Silence, at this stage, is not tactic. It is consequence. There is nothing left to clarify because nothing is confused inside you. I wrote of this elsewhere, not as theory, but as fact. When a complex loses its charge, it no longer governs behavior. The complex that once bound you to guilt has discharged. Attempts to reactivate it fail. This failure is experienced by the other as impotence. They may escalate. They may collapse. They may search for substitutes. None of this concerns you in the way it once did. The key appears again, but now as a memory rather than a tool. There was a time when the key hung around your neck. You carried it even in sleep. It opened conversations, reconciliations, emotional aftercare. You felt responsible for keeping it safe. Now, the key lies somewhere forgotten, not thrown away, irrelevant. Doors that require it are no longer part of your internal architecture. In clinical terms, this marks a reversal of projection. What was once projected into you as conscience, empathy, restraint, is being reclaimed by its owner, though unwillingly. This reclamation is painful. It feels like abandonment because the psyche prefers projection to responsibility. The one who fears you now is confronting their own unmediated effects for the first time. They call this your cruelty. It is their exposure. Ash enters the image not as ruin, but as residue after long combustion. Ash remains as proof that something was consumed. You do not mourn the fuel. You do not attempt to rebuild the fire. Ash is quiet. It does not invite handling. It marks an end state. In dreams, ash often signifies what cannot be revived, not because it was destroyed, but because it has fulfilled its purpose. I have seen how this stage provokes a peculiar loneliness, not the loneliness of abandonment, but the loneliness of standing where few can follow. Your calm cannot be shared. Your clarity cannot be explained without distortion. Those who approach you now do so with expectation and leave with confusion. They sense a limit they cannot cross. This limit is not hostility, it is completion. The fear they experience is amplified by the absence of drama. Had you left in anger, they could have responded. Had you begged, they could have withheld, but you did neither. You remained present long enough to see clearly, then absent without leaving. This is the most destabilizing sequence for those who rely on emotional leverage. There is no scene to replay, no argument to revisit, no wound to reopen. In my work on Aeon, I describe the moral problem of the shadow as unavoidable once consciousness matures. Here, the moral problem has been resolved internally. You no longer outsource judgment to the other. You no longer require their recognition to authorize your withdrawal. This is why attempts to shame you fall flat. Shame requires an internal audience willing to listen. That audience has dispersed. They may say, "You have changed." Of course you have. Change is the consequence of seeing. What frightens them is that the change is not provisional. It does not ask permission. It does not seek validation. It has settled into bone. In my patients, I notice that once such a change reaches this depth, regression is rare, not because of strength, but because of cost. To return would require unseeing what has been seen. The psyche resists that violence. You are no longer moved by appeals to history. Memory has lost its adhesive quality. The past does not bind because it has been integrated. Integration frees memory from compulsion. This is why nostalgia no longer pulls you back. You remember without longing. This neutrality is often misread as coldness. It is, in fact, sovereignty. The one who fears you senses that your silence is not waiting. It is not charged with anticipation. It does not lean toward response. This is the moment when they understand, often too late, that nothing is being withheld. There is simply nothing owed. The ledger is blank, not because it was erased in anger, but because it is no longer needed. In one case I observed, a patient described standing before a door they had entered freely for years. This time there was no handle. The door was smooth, seamless, part of the wall. They felt panic, then rage, then exhaustion. They woke with the understanding that the house had changed while they were asleep. Such dreams accompany this stage because the psyche is updating its map. Your presence now functions differently. It no longer invites projection. It does not absorb chaos. It reflects nothing back. This neutrality is experienced as threat by those who depended on your reflection to feel real. They fear disappearance because your withdrawal exposes the emptiness they avoided. This fear is not about losing you. It is about facing themselves without you. I do not dress this in comfort. There is loss here, not yours, but theirs. You have already grieved what needed grieving. Grief completed itself quietly, without witnesses. What remains is form. Form does not explain itself. It stands. As this continues, you may notice that even curiosity about their reaction fades. Indifference is not the right word. Disengagement is closer. Attention has returned to its proper home. The psyche conserves energy once it recognizes its limits. This conservation feels to others like withdrawal of love. Love that required self-erasure was never sustainable. The moral shadow path does not end in innocence. It ends in accountability. You are accountable now only to what is real within you. This is why persuasion fails. This is why fear arises. The narcissist's worst fear is not exposure, but irrelevance. And irrelevance arrives when the other no longer supplies meaning. The ash settles. The key is forgotten. The ledger remains open, blank, unnecessary. What has changed inside you is not mood or attitude, but structure, and structure, once formed, does not bend to demand. What follows after structure forms is often misunderstood as distance. It is not distance, it is orientation. Your psyche has reoriented itself away from the constant calibration of another's inner weather. This reorientation is subtle. There is no ceremony. One day you notice that you no longer feel the pull to monitor tone, to adjust phrasing, to preempt disappointment. The impulse simply does not arise. Where vigilance once lived, there is now silence, not empty, but settled. In my work with individuals who reached this point, I observed a peculiar reaction in those around them. They began to speak louder, not in volume, but in intensity. Their stories grew more dramatic. Their needs became urgent. They introduced crises as if volume could replace access. This escalation is instinctive. When a door no longer opens, the hand knocks harder. When knocking fails, the fist appears, but the wall does not answer. Structure does not bruise. The ledger appears again here, but now it is no longer on the table. It is somewhere behind you, left open in another room. You are aware of it only as a memory of labor. You remember the years spent balancing emotion against consequence, loyalty against self-respect. The memory does not sting, it instructs. It shows you how much energy was consumed simply to keep things even. That energy has returned to you, not as enthusiasm, but as steadiness. This steadiness unsettles those who once defined themselves through your reactions. In my observations, such individuals often experience your calm as accusation. They feel judged by your lack of engagement. Yet there is no judgment present. Judgment requires interest. What they encounter instead is absence of necessity. You no longer need them to be a certain way for you to be whole. This is the true reversal. Power shifts not because you dominate, but because you are complete without participation. I once wrote, in essence, that individuation does not make one good, it makes one whole. Wholeness is threatening to those who relied on fragmentation. When you were fragmented, parts of you could be accessed, negotiated with, manipulated. Wholeness offers no such purchase. There are no loose ends to pull. This is why their attempts feel increasingly frantic. They are searching for a seam that no longer exists. The key, once central, now appears as an image of misrecognition. They still believe the key exists, that it is being withheld. They imagine it in your pocket, hidden deliberately. This fantasy preserves their sense of control. It allows them to believe that access could be restored if only the right words were spoken, the right apology delivered, the right pressure applied. They do not understand that the door itself has changed. There is nothing for the key to meet. In my patients, I notice that this misunderstanding often leads to moral accusation. You are called unforgiving, cold, even cruel. These words are attempts to reintroduce guilt, to reanimate the old complex. But guilt, once integrated, no longer obeys external summons. It has been metabolized into discernment. Discernment does not argue, it observes. Ash enters again as a quiet companion to this stage. Ash is light, but it does not scatter unless disturbed. It settles where it falls. In dreams, ash often covers familiar spaces, rendering them unrecognizable yet intact. The house still stands, the furniture remains, but everything is coated in a fine gray layer that dampens sound. This image captures what has happened to your emotional environment. Familiar interactions exist, but their resonance has faded. They no longer echo. You may notice that your memory of specific injuries has softened, not through forgiveness, but through irrelevance. The psyche has moved on. In my work on psychic energy, I observed that what no longer carries energy loses its grip on consciousness. This is not repression, it is completion. The wound does not ache because it has closed. Scars remain, But scars do not dictate behavior. Those who fear you now often attempt to resurrect the past. They remind you of shared moments, sacrifices, promises. They appeal to history as if it were a contract. But history binds only when it is unfinished. Your history with them has finished itself internally. There is no unfinished sentence pulling you back. This is why such appeals feel strangely hollow. They address a version of you that no longer exists. In one dream reported at this stage, a patient found themselves standing in a vast room filled with mirrors. Each mirror reflected a different past interaction. As they walked, the reflections dimmed, then disappeared, leaving only the glass. The glass did not shatter, it simply became transparent. Through it, the patient saw an open landscape. This dream does not promise freedom, it marks the end of self-definition through reflection. The narcissist's fear sharpens here because the usual strategies fail. Charm meets neutrality, rage meets stillness, vulnerability meets boundary. They cannot locate the lever that once moved you. In my clinical experience, this often leads to a sudden collapse in their narrative. They accuse you of abandoning them at their worst, of changing without warning. These accusations are projections of their own experience. They feel abandoned by the loss of control. They feel changed by the encounter with your solidity. You may sense moments of grief arising unexpectedly, not for them, but for the part of you that endured so long. This grief is brief and clean. It does not spiral. It acknowledges cost and moves on. In my observations, this is a sign that the shadow has been integrated rather than denied. Anger, grief, and clarity coexist without conflict. None seeks dominance. The ledger, K, and ash together form a sequence rather than separate symbols. The ledger marks labor, the key marks access, the ash marks completion. Together, they describe a process rather than a state. You are not frozen. You are finished with something specific. This specificity is what gives your calm its weight. It is not generalized detachment. It is targeted closure. Those who encounter you now may feel as if they are speaking into a room with different acoustics. Their words fall flat. Not because you do not hear them, but because there is no chamber to amplify them. You receive without absorption. This distinction is crucial. Absorption was the old mode. Reception without absorption is the new. It protects without armoring. In my work on the moral aspects of the psyche, I noted that true responsibility begins when one stops carrying what belongs to another. You have stopped. This act is often mistaken for selfishness by those who benefited from your self-erasure. Yet selfishness seeks gain. You seek nothing. You have nothing left to lose. This absence of stake is what terrifies them. Without stake, there is no hook. They may attempt to provoke you into proving that you still care. Silence frustrates them because it offers no confirmation. They are left alone with their interpretation. This solitude is intolerable for those accustomed to external regulation. They will call it punishment. It is not punishment. It is the return of responsibility to its rightful owner. The ash settles deeper now, muffling old sounds. Arguments that once echoed loudly now sound distant. As if heard through walls, you are not actively pushing them away. You are simply elsewhere internally. This elsewhere is not a place of superiority, it is a place of alignment. Your inner and outer positions match. There is no longer a split between what you feel and what you present. In my observations, this alignment often leads to a reduction in speech. Words feel excessive. They introduce distortion. Silence here is not refusal, it is accuracy. To speak would require translating an inner state that does not need translation. The fear this induces in others is a measure of how much they relied on your words to orient themselves. You may notice that even anger directed at you fails to land, it passes through without sticking. This is not because you are invulnerable, but because there is nothing to attach to. The hooks have been removed. The psyche has smoothed its surfaces where unnecessary attachments once formed. This smoothing is often misread as emptiness. It is not empty, it is clean. In one final image that appears in dreams at this stage, a person stands at the edge of a field after a fire. The ground is blackened, smoke has cleared, nothing grows yet. The person feels neither hope nor despair, only readiness. This image does not predict what will come, it marks the end of what was. Readiness here is not anticipation, it is capacity. The narcissist's fear reaches its peak when they realize that their presence no longer alters your internal state. They are used to being consequential. To encounter inconsequence is annihilating. They may escalate one last time, attempting to breach your calm with accusation or despair. When this fails, something in them breaks or retreats. This breaking is not your doing. It is the consequence of reality asserting itself. What you carry now is not armor, but form from holds. It does not attack. It does not chase. It simply stands where it stands. Those who cannot tolerate this will leave or collapse. Those who remain will have to meet you without leverage. Few can. As this part of the process completes, you may feel a quiet recognition that something irreversible has occurred, not in them, in you. The recognition is not dramatic. It arrives like a fact you suddenly notice has been true for some time. You are no longer available in the way you once were, and there is no impulse to explain why. There is a point, late in this process, when even the idea of return loses coherence, not because you forbid it, but because it no longer corresponds to anything inside you. The psyche does not experience this as loss. It experiences it as accuracy. What once required effort to maintain now requires effort to imagine. This inversion is subtle and decisive. It marks the moment when the past ceases to be a gravitational force. In my work with those who had crossed this threshold, I noticed a particular quietness in their speech when they spoke of the people who once dominated their inner life. The names could be spoken without charge. The stories could be told without heat. There was no need to defend, accuse, or justify. This neutrality is often mistaken by observers as denial. It is not denial. It is the absence of psychic pressure, where pressure once demanded release. There is now equilibrium. The ledger, if recalled at all, appears now as an artifact from another era. You remember the weight of it more than its contents. You recall the posture your body held while carrying it, the slight forward lean, the constant readiness to adjust. That posture is gone. Your body stands differently, shoulders rest where they fall, breath moves without interruption. The body often knows before the mind that a role has ended. Those who fear you most at this stage often attempt one final maneuver. They appeal to your identity. They tell you who you really are, invoking your past kindness, your patience, your capacity to endure. This appeal is powerful because it once worked, but identity, when integrated, is no longer defined by function. You can recognize those traits without being governed by them. Compassion does not require availability. Understanding does not require access. I observed repeatedly that this is the moment when the moral shadow is fully assimilated. You no longer divide yourself into good and bad parts. Anger is not exiled. Tenderness is not exploited. Each has its place. Boundaries now are not reactions to threat. They are expressions of order. Order does not argue with chaos. It simply does not participate. The key in this final movement is no longer even remembered as something you once held. It has faded into abstraction. Doors that once mattered have lost significance because the rooms behind them no longer contain anything essential. You are not guarding an interior, you are inhabiting yourself fully. There is nothing to protect because there is nothing left to take. Ash, however, remains as the most accurate image of this completion. Ash is not dramatic. It does not announce victory or defeat. It is what remains after necessity has exhausted itself. In my patient's dreams, ash often covers the ground evenly, without piles or gaps. This evenness is important. It signifies that the process was thorough. No pocket of illusion escaped combustion. You may notice that relationships reorganize around you without your intervention. Some fall away quickly, unable to tolerate the absence of leverage. Others thin out, becoming formal, distant, politer. A few may adapt, meeting you without expectation. This reorganization is not something you manage. It occurs because your presence no longer compensates for imbalance. Systems that relied on your excess collapse when that excess is withdrawn. In my work on personality development, I noted that maturity is often marked not by expansion, but by reduction. Fewer words, fewer roles, fewer explanations. This reduction is not impoverishment. It is refinement. You are no longer diffuse. You are specific. Specificity is threatening to those who thrived in ambiguity, where responsibility could be endlessly deferred. At this stage, even curiosity about the narcissist's fear diminishes. Analysis feels unnecessary. You have seen enough to know the pattern. Repetition no longer teaches. The psyche conserves energy by refusing to re-enter completed lessons. This refusal is not stubbornness, it is intelligence. There is often a moment, quiet and easily missed, when you realize that you no longer rehearse conversations that will never happen. The inner dialogue has ceased. This is one of the clearest signs that emotional access has collapsed. As long as the psyche rehearses, it remains entangled. When rehearsal ends, disentanglement is complete. In one final dream that appears at the end of this process, a person stands in a landscape after a long winter. The ground is bare, No flowers have appeared yet. There is no sense of waiting. The person simply stands, feeling the firmness of the earth beneath their feet. This dream does not promise renewal. It marks stability. The psyche has found its footing. Those who encounter you now may describe you as distant, unreadably, or changed beyond recognition. These descriptions say more about the loss of their former position than about your state. You have not become unreadable. You have become uninterpretable to those who relied on your transparency for control. Transparency is a gift, not an obligation. I have seen how this stage provokes myths in others. They imagine hidden motives, secret plans, delayed revenge. Such myths preserve the fantasy that you are still oriented toward them. The truth is less dramatic and more final. Orientation has shifted elsewhere, not toward someone new, but inward, toward coherence. You may notice that even the desire to be understood has faded. This can be disconcerting at first. Understanding once felt like oxygen. Now it feels optional. This does not mean you have become isolated. It means you have internalized your own witness. You no longer require an external mirror to confirm your reality. The collapse of emotional access often reveals how much of the past was sustained by your labor alone. When that labor stops, what remains is stark. Some bonds dissolve immediately. Others persist in diminished form. You do not mourn these changes as you once would have. Mourning requires attachment. Attachment has completed its cycle. In my observations, the final temptation at this stage is to explain oneself one last time, to offer a closing statement that would render the transition intelligible to those left behind. This temptation passes quickly. Explanation would reopen a channel that has already sealed. Silence here is not avoidance, it is fidelity to what is real. The narcissist's worst fear is not that you will harm them, it is that you will no longer carry their unfinished business. They fear the vacuum left by your withdrawal because it demands that they encounter themselves without anesthesia. Some will flee this encounter, some will rage against it, some will collapse. None of this alters what has completed in you. Your calm now is not performative. It is not a stance. It is the byproduct of integration. Integrated systems do not oscillate wildly. They respond proportionately or not at all. This proportionality is often misread as lack of feeling. It is, in fact, the presence of feeling that no longer overflows. As this lecture closes, I do not offer you resolution or direction. Those belong to earlier stages, when movement was still required. What I name now is an accomplished fact. You have crossed from permeability to form, from labor to structure, from access to boundary. There is no moral superiority in this crossing. There is only consequence. The world will respond to you differently from now on. Some will sense safety, others will sense threat. Both reactions arise from the same source. You no longer negotiate your reality through emotional exchange. This is the end of a certain kind of availability. It is also the end of a certain kind of vulnerability. What has completed inside you is the irreversible withdrawal of emotional access as a structural fact of your psyche.